this short episode.
I wanted to do a follow up to our episode last week, which we got a great many views on such an important topic. And I wanted to follow up with future episodes on gaps in the system. And look, in when did I do my dissertation? Many, many years ago, when I did my dissertation, it was on the prediction of dangerousness. And one of the things I realized when I was studying about some awful homicides that took place was that your middle daughter Jade could have figured out that dangerousness was going to take place. There's a whole argument in my field that you can't predict dangerousness. You don't know who's going to be violent. But I'm telling you, like I said last week, there are many, many, many signs along the way. And the fact that the price is so high, the loss of life in last week's awful shooting, the loss of life of young people, and the fact that there are these gaps and cracks that need to be filled so that we don't lose life unnecessarily is just so important. It's such a topic that I wanted to get out there and let everybody really, really think about it and push for some reform, mostly in the mental health system. And I do want to say a majority of psychiatric patients are not violent, but in that small percent that are, we need to get better and address the needs, the overwhelming needs of the mental health system that really have just exploded since the pandemic. And we don't have the resources, the staff, the waits to get appointments. It's just way too long. We have to do something and come up with some remedies.
So, what
And
are
I
your
don't,
ideas? Because from what I've heard, and not just in your field, nobody. It's very. I shouldn't say very rare, but college is not. People aren't thinking about becoming psychologists. They're not thinking about becoming psychiatrists. They're not thinking about becoming doctors. They're not thinking about becoming police officers. They're not thinking about becoming. They don't want to be the change they want to see in the world. I know some people might think that that's a little bit of a blunt statement, that it's negative, right? But, you know, a lot of people will share on social media, they'll talk to their friends, they'll join a club, they'll call somebody out in public and record the entire interaction, stuff like that. But what are you actually doing to be the change you want to see in the world? And if I'm wrong, please tell me. But I mean, you used to have a flood of interns, and they're few and far between these days. The last couple of years, am I right?
well, some of it is not to blame everything on the pandemic, but some of it is because of that. I don't know the statistics off the top of my head for people majoring in psychiatry and psychology, but we could do better than we're doing. So
So, how do you
some of,
recruit psychologists? If I'm a police officer, I'm having
well,
a police fair. How do you recruit people to want to be a mental health advocate, if you will, to do
well,
something like you do, whether it's a counselor or a psychologist, whatever the case may be?
first of all, we have to understand that every geographic area has a mental health center. And I said this before on the podcast. So different states are divided into what we call different catchment areas. The staff in the mental health centers are overworked. They have too big a caseload. So we have to bring on some more staff. There's certain things I just can't understand. For example, I don't understand why there isn't a mental health team in every ER in every hospital. So who comes into the ER? I'd like to tell you it's all really medical emergencies, but some of them are social work problems. Some of them are repetitive drug and alcohol problems. Some of them are people who don't have primary care doctors and they use the ER for that. So how is there not a mental health person in every ER? That I've never understood. Let's go back to the awful tragedy at the Oxford school shooting. They had the thing that will haunt the parents forever is that they had the boy in custody, so to speak, right?
Mm-hmm.
How come we don't have the clear school bags as a mandate? Way, way back in Columbine, the government and powers that be said they're going to have a law enacted that meant that the kids had to have clear school bags. That could have saved the lives because they would have seen the weapon. So, whatever happened to that?
I don't
It's
think
not.
that because Monica was talking to me about that, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but it goes back because you and I always disagree on this. You think respectfully that the answer is a law coming into play or something like that, where Monica told me that because of COVID, students don't use their lockers anymore. All right. And I said, as somebody who's trained law enforcement, as somebody who I would say that my situational awareness is above average. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to toot my own horn. And to kind of create balance with my statement, I also can be a little over, if you will. I'll be looking at somebody and I'll be like, what's that guy up to? And so in most
Mhm.
cases, they're fine. So I go both ways with it. But the point I'm trying to make is that when Monica was telling me that these students don't use lockers anymore because of COVID, I think to me that's a good thing if students took their bags to class because at least the teacher would see a kid fucking around in his bag. I told Monica I wouldn't be surprised if a student saw another student pull out a gun, that him and the other students or her and the other students would jump on him and tackle him. I think that that's a pretty safe assessment to make. I'm kind of getting off topic here, but the point I'm trying to make is that I don't think the answer is just any one item. I think it's actions as well. Because clear school bags, it's not
No, I
really
say
the
that.
the world
I
I
say
want my
that all the
kids to live
time.
in.
I don't think it's any one thing, but I think that would give a pause if they knew they couldn't conceal the weapon so easily. What really bothers me is that they had the perpetrator in some kind of meeting and they gave the parents 48 hours, and with the psychological profile that he was showing, that was not a good decision to make, I don't think. I think he should have had to go to crisis. And here's the problem. So when I try to send somebody to crisis, there can be a wait. And you say, well, how can there be a wait? It's a crisis. So I don't know exactly what happened at the school. Again, I don't want to judge, but I know that when I have to do a hospitalization or send somebody to crisis, honestly, the first thing that goes in my mind, this is going to be a big headache. Look, we don't even have an ambulance. Did you ever think of this? We don't have some kind of emergency service for mental health crisis. How could that be? It's 2021. How could that be? So if I have to send a patient to the hospital, there's other than the police, who parents and spouses often don't want to get the police involved, there's no mechanism to make sure somebody gets to the hospital. Oh, and
So
by the
let's
way,
go
well, I
ahead.
just want to make one other point. So everybody knows the frustrations of mental health doctors. Then we call the hospital because we want to know that the patient got there safely, especially if it's somebody younger. And what do you think the hospital says? Under HIPAA, we can't tell you, Dr. Feinstein, if the patient got here. Imagine you're in the business world. Imagine for a minute sending business, because in essence, we are sending business to another business, and the business saying, we can't tell you, Mr. Oppenheimer, if that business got here.
Well, HIPAA protects you, and it is. I don't think even you're allowed to. I think they're just doing their jobs when it's HIPAA, aren't they?
To a point, but what I'm saying is, wouldn't it be better if there was some kind of emergency service in place? So
How do I
far,
know on the phone that you're Dr. Feinstein?
there's no, that's a good question. I mean, there's the same hospitals that we use over and over, and there's a series of questions they could ask me. I
So
always
there
have
should
the
be a
patient,
liaison, like a guidance counselor,
something like
like
that,
some
right?
yes,
Right.
not
And I
somebody
always
at the front desk whose responsibility it is.
yeah, I always have the patient's
Yeah.
date of birth, something. So tonight I wanted to talk about those cracks in the system, something about security. There is some crack in the system. Kids are getting weapons in the
So
school,
let me
right?
pause real quick because you were making it a lot about mental health when we're trying to follow up on what it was last week. So you're talking about your system, which is something completely different as far as, as a follow up of last week, um,
Well, not
respectfully.
really, because he fell through
Well,
the mental health cracks, didn't he?
Well, you're talking
Hmm.
about the mental health cracks and talking about, making it on your end when I can tell you firsthand that I've spoken to teachers who, and if you see it on the news, you see it on Facebook, teachers, principals, superintendents, school boards are succumbing to the pressure from parents, from the political end, from the mask end, from the mandate end, from the homeschool end. It's the same thing in law enforcement. People just don't want to deal with it, right? And everybody who's listening, who's on the right or the left is going to think that we're making it something political, but we're not. But it's the reality, right? People don't want to become police officers. Um, Police officers are afraid to do their job to the full capacity, or whatever the case may be, because of the repercussions that may follow. Let me follow up by saying that I support law enforcement and also agree that there should be reform in some capacity. The point I'm trying to make is that these principals and superintendents intendants will not do what they should be doing because they're afraid of the repercussions from the parents and the angry mob and the pitchforks and things like that. And that's just the reality of where we're at, right? So I know that one teacher who a student told her, "Well, I'll just come in and shoot you tomorrow." The student was in school the next day. The student was not suspended, expelled, or anything of that nature, right? And when I asked his teacher why wasn't this done, because I thought that that was protocol after Columbine and Parkland, that if you made a threat of that magnitude, you were to be expelled or suspended right off the bat. That's not happening consistently, right? Period. That is not happening consistently across the board in the schools across the country. They are not being reprimanded the way they should be when they make this threat. Is there any validity to this threat? Did you investigate this threat? There's no validity. The kid wasn't going to carry it out. Cool. What kind of precedent are you setting by just letting the kid come back the next day because your investigation showed that there was no real threat? Screw that. Make the kid an example and every kid after them an example. You want to come in, you want to make that sort of threat, you're going to have some sort of serious repercussion.
Right, but just as to what you said, I agree that many of the higher ups in the school system succumb to not only the parents, but to the board,
Mhm.
and don't make the best decision. But
Mhm.
to go back and pair it with my fields, if there was some objective criteria, I think that would help. So after I really, really thought after Columbine, there would be massive change. I said this before. I thought there would be
I
quote
think there
unquote,
was.
well, temporary.
Well, I just no, because I actually was thinking about it, and I know that it wasn't to the point that some of us. I think, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot here. I think that you want to see some drastic changes
I
when it
do.
comes to things, which is fine. That's fine. That's your opinion. To me, one of the things that I know most schools, at least the high school I went to and the junior high school I went to, one way in and one way out, right? None of the
Right.
doors were unlocked. You hired retired police officers to be security. They were unarmed, but patrol and kind of keep things in order, right? But one way in and one way out is a big thing because I think even when Jamie and Sean were going to high school, you could leave and go have lunch at Taco
Hmm.
Bell, right? All
Hmm.
that came
Hmm.
to an end. When you were in,
Hmm.
and you couldn't leave and things like that. Um, I would imagine that helped in some way, shape, or form. Um, and then other things that some schools put into play. But I would say that there was some sort of reform following Columbine to some extent.
But not what I would think. And when you say I want something dramatic, I do because the law, you can't go to school. I'll say this every time we talk about this. You can't go to school and be afraid you'll lose your life. Did you know that this country has more school shootings now than any other country?
Hmm.
That's a drastic statistic. The United States has more school shootings than any other country. So that should call for some pretty extreme measures. But
So
back
let's
to mhm,
No, I was gonna say because before you and I both forget. So we're talking about the mental health system. We're talking about what schools did on their end, and then
mhm,
something that you and I talked about last week. Something I'm big on. Something a teacher that I'm married to is it mentions once in a while. The parents, and we found out after you and I aired that episode that the parents were very involved in his firearm usage,
mhm,
in encouraging his behavior in some ways, right? So we're talking about the schools and the mental health
mhm.
system. And one thing that I think about, and I just don't know how we would change it. Maybe you have an idea, and this is why I asked you last week. You know what you see in the office. Like it has to start with the parents. So how
It's
do you reform the parents? I just give up when I start
well,
thinking about that because you would have to there's
mm.
no way you're going to rehabilitate every single member of society. And when I say rehabilitate everybody, I don't mean lock us up in cages and have seminars and stuff of that nature, but there's just no one answer to kind of get people on the same page. I don't foresee it happening. What do
No,
you think?
but to go back to my topic for a minute about cracks in the system, and I want to honor the victims because I really hate when they keep saying the perpetrator's name and not the victims. So imagine you're Hannah, Justin, Tate, or Madison's family, those really unfortunate students that lost their lives. And you hear all the chances that there was to stop this. And again, that's what my thesis was on. So let's start with the first chance to start it, to stop it.
Mhm.
Neighbors called the parents in. I don't know if you know this, to children's services years ago
Mhm.
when the perpetrator was young, because the parents went out and, like 8 or 9 years old, left him out for hours, left him alone. Crack in the system, no follow up, horrible parental judgment, and maybe if the powers that be had said he was going to be monitored till 18, that was one place to stop it, right? Some kind of monitoring, because maybe it would have come out about the gun.
Right.
So again, imagine you're the family member and you hear that concerned neighbors were calling this in and not knocking the government. I have not had good success when I called things in to child services, child protective services. There
I
are
got
cracks. They do drop the ball sometimes.
Let me ask you something, and people are kind of think that I'm getting off topic because uh, there's nothing academic or smart in the question I'm about to ask or what I'm about to say. So you and I know a certain social worker, and that certain social worker always talks about the people in her field. Let's be honest, everybody. Money is the name of the game. Okay, are our social workers and our mental health workers are people who respond to things like this in the middle of the night or whatever the case may be. What's the motivation to stay in that field? You see some horrible things, you get yelled at, you get spit on, you get scratched, you get kicked, you get told that you're the scum of the earth if you have to take somebody's kid away. If I'm only making $35,000 a year for it, right? Unless I really, really want to help that person, where does it even out? And I'm asking this because how do you keep the resources that we need motivated to stay in the fight?
No, that's part of the overhaul. And that's what I said. Those catchment areas, those mental health services, they're staffed by young people for the most part with their first job and they're underpaid. You're exactly right. And they burn out. You ever hear the compassion fatigue that people in my
No,
field get? It's like a
you
PTSD.
care too much, and then you
You
just stop caring.
exactly, and then you're just fatigued on it. It's too much. We're the lowest paid of all the professionals. We are the stepchild. Mental health is the stepchild of all medicine. I would like Monica or some of the teachers that listen to tell us. I was thinking about this. You know, when you had gym class and then some of it rotated with health
Mhm.
education.
Yeah.
But I think that was mostly physical health education. So we have a divide in this country where we prioritize physical health, but I don't know how many classes you had on mental health.
No, John
One in
Anthony has said that too. Yeah.
1 in 5 Americans, 1 in 5, will experience a mental health problem. The average time I read to get services can be a decade to get to the right service. A decade. A lot can happen in that decade. And again, I'm not saying that most psychiatric patients are violent. I went back and I reread Sue Klebold's book. And I would recommend it to anybody. Very brave woman who didn't hide after her son Dylan was the one of the aggressors in Columbine, but wrote a book. And one thing she says that really, really sticks out. Well, two things. One is that it's a really fine line between suicidal and homicidal. And we really have to listen because a lot of these shooters obviously were suicidal and then the aggression kicked in. But the second thing she said is something I always say: the arrogance of parents. No offense, you're a parent of young people. The arrogance of parents, and I hope everybody's listening to this, to say that I know my child. She said, I knew my child. Dylan would never be aggressive. I know my child. Nobody knows anybody like they think they do. Nobody knows their child like they think they do. I have sat in sessions knowing the child did something, knowing for a fact the kid disclosed it, and the parent says, Dr. Joan, my kid would never do that. Really? Because it's already done.
But
So
you're
I
still
called. Mhm.
I got to jump in here because you're still, and I'm always going to bring it back. And parents, you can hate me all you want. You're still talking about the kid. You're always talking about the kid, and I always
Well,
bring
I
it
am.
back to it's the
I am always
parents, right?
talking about the
Well,
kid.
and I always bring it back to it's the parents. So you can tell
Well,
me, and so no, no, wait. You can always tell me until you're blue in the face that there should be, and I agree to an extent that there could and should be a little bit more focus on mental health at the academic level, whether it be in middle school, elementary school, high school, right? But if Jade brings me home her math homework and she doesn't understand it, it's Monica's job or my job to reinforce it, right? It's Monica's job or my job to reinforce what they are learning at school. And maybe they take on some things that they want to do on their own, like Alexis. I never thought that she'd want to be in emergency services, but she found it on her own. But long story short, if the kid goes home and says, Mom, Dad, this is what I learned in mental health class today, and the parent goes, well, you don't need that, right? You're a happy
and
kid.
they
You don't
do.
need it, right? So that's what I'm saying is that
Oh, they
you
do.
can
They
say,
do.
right. But what I'm saying is that at the end of the day, if the parent doesn't reinforce it at that age, that pinnacle age, when they're still trying to process everything, it's not going to do any good unless the parent reinforces
No,
it.
no, I agree. And I am very kid focused, you can tell from my work. But back to the parents, everything in this country is a rush. So if you think that parents didn't pay attention to mental health, there's no better place to look at that than with the pandemic. So teachers are guilty of it, educators, all of us. The rush, I call it, to normalcy. Let's get the kids back in school. Let's rush them. And I'm not taking a position on that so much. Should we have opened the schools? But we didn't address their mental health needs. I'm telling you, kids have a level of anxiety I've never seen before. And nobody addresses that. They just business as usual. Let's pretend it never happened. So you're right. The parents need to be more in tune with what's going on with their kids. And to not to miss my point about Dylan Klebold's mom, what she said was address to parents, wake up. You don't know your kid. Don't make the statement that I know my kid would never, because everybody's got a secret life in their psyche. I think we have a few comments.
Marla says it's not just the shooting, it is just violence in general. Most schools are seeing fighting and just overall bad behavior. Do you think this change is due to mental health issues, due to what the world has been through in the past few years? Did COVID bring mental illness and overall cracks in the system into light? Um, I don't know. I I don't think so.
So,
I
but
don't think so.
I think it is, to Marla's point, I think it is violence in general, not just in the schools. But I think one of the cracks is in parenting because parents aren't parents. And teachers tell me stories like this: a kid threw a eraser at the principal, the parents are called in, and here's the parent's first question: what did the principal do to make my son throw the eraser? As if there's any reason other than self defense, which is highly unlikely. What reason would there be for a kid to throw an object at the principal? So I think there is a crack in parenting. Parents are friends, not parents, afraid to put some limits and boundaries. And just the general respect is missing. So I think that has had a tremendous impact on the behavior of kids. And I don't think it's just school shootings. We are
No.
now a violent society. Agreed?
I this is where people, and if you're listening to me, please take my advice in some capacity. take some extreme ownership, right? I read things online, as we all do, that get my blood boiling, and I'd love to get my input on it. But I said this to John Anthony, and I say it all the time. If I share an article, right, or if I comment on something that's taking place, let's just say the vaccine, right? I'm vaccinated, everybody, I'm using an example, right? What am I going to do? I'm going to fucking piss off at least 20 or 30 people on my Facebook, right? And the reason I say this is because as much as I would like to share my thoughts on things, I have come to the conclusion that I am pushing hate back out into the world if I share something, if I speak on something, right? It doesn't make a difference because whatever you think, that's your opinion, right? But you see it all the time. People have to share their opinion on social media, right? And what's the result? I would love to take a poll one day and say and ask if your opinion was ever changed by somebody's social media post, please like this, right? Because
That's a good idea.
what would the result be? It probably would be there'd probably be no likes, right? Unless it was something well thought out and it was, unbiased maybe and gave points from both sides, then maybe somebody might be like, it kind of made me see the other side of things. But it's just too this isn't a racial thing, people. I'm just saying it too black and white these days, right? You can't nobody can have a conversation. It has to be if you support this person, you're this. If you support this person, you're that. It's like, how about maybe I support this and I like this and I have some thoughts about this. Does that make sense?
Oh, it does. And remember, I said it's no more conversations in this country. It's confrontations, not conversations. That's one of
Right.
my
So that's where
famous things to say.
I was going with my long-winded explanation was that there's just no discussion. And right, what does that lead? As John Anthony would ask, that leaves people or say that leaves people in their fears, and then fear after fear is anxiety. After all that is anger, and then everybody kind of has their back up and is in defense mode. Right. So what I'm trying to say is just relax, take it all
Uh,
in, be grateful for what you have. And I know some people are just like, that's easier said than done. It is. It's really fucking hard to keep your mind focused on the good in the world and in life. And I get it. Believe me, I work in hospitality. Sometimes, even on Monday, somebody told me right off the bat, go fuck yourself at 7 a.m. in the morning. And I was like, I would love to punch you in the face so hard. Right. But it's just going to be a mess for everybody. Right. It's hard keeping your feelings and emotions in check. I get
and
it.
looking
It's
at the
freaking hard.
consequences, right?
Exactly.
So
So I was
you
gonna
said
read Shauna's
something in
next. But go ahead.
one thing before your sister, but
Yeah,
what you said about you'd love to post on Facebook who changed their attitude or belief system, social psych 101, the most resistant thing to change are attitudes. So when somebody has an attitude about guns, an attitude, a belief system, it's very resistant to change.
yeah,
So
yeah.
that was a good point you made. Okay, you want to read?
You know what Jocker said at the seminar?
No.
It there's a point to this, people, but he ended it with a joke. He said people don't like having things imposed on them, and then he said, take for example taxes and tea, the Boston Tea Party, right? But it's true. People don't like having things
Of
imposed
course.
on them. And if I post something and say that you are this, that, or the other thing, I'm imposing my belief on you and I'm going to piss you off.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so Shauna next, and I think that she said that what most of us already know. She said, "You guys don't understand. Social workers always get the blame. They have no control over anything. The judges make the decisions if a child is removed or what the parents need to do. Social workers have their hands tied and get the blame for everything." No, I mean, I don't think anybody's disagreeing with that. Um, but to Shauna's point, and to just mix it into what we've been saying, why would you want to be a social worker if your work just it doesn't matter what you say, the judge is going to have the final say, and and I'm going to bring it up again because money's the name of the game, right? You're still not making a ton of money, right? What's keeping you motivated? Money's going to keep you motivated, bonuses are going to keep you motivated, because the work's not. All the work you're putting into it, the judge has the final say. That's not going to keep you motivated. So why would anybody in their right mind want to be a social worker? Maybe she can answer.
because they
And I'm
think
not
they're
saying
going to
this. I'm
change the
not saying
world.
we don't need social workers. I'm
Right.
saying why would you stay when we need in the field?
But they don't go into it thinking the judge isn't going to listen. What's their belief system when they go into it? They're going to change the world.
So, what kind of mentors are there for social workers before they graduate? Is there a
What
class? Is there a seminar or something at a college? I don't know. Like, who is reinforcing this idea? Like, when you get out of college, this is what you're going to do. Or is there just nobody? You just think you're going to be a social worker?
Well, Shauna might have a jaundiced eye because she intersects with the law. She's worked with the court, she works in a prison. So that's one subsection of social work. There's social workers who work at Children's Hospital, for example, and help kids with chronic illnesses. They probably have some more satisfaction. She
There's going to be
intersects
a
with the
steady
law.
decline in social workers in the future. The pay is basically poverty, right? So that's what I'm saying. You don't, and people are like, why do you keep bringing up money? Because if there's no gratification from my damn
Mhm.
job that I do every day, and I'm
Right.
not making money, I'll just go DoorDash because I can do it on my own schedule and maybe make a little bit more money.
And it takes so much money to live. It's not like when I grew up and you could make a so-so salary and still live comfortably. It's not like that anymore, right? Basic things are very, very expensive, like health insurance and living in a safe neighborhood. So it has changed quite a bit. I don't know, Shauna, about the field of social work. I like I said, she's in a very particular subsection where it intersects with the legal issues in the courts. But I'm curious what makes her say that the judges don't listen at all. I hope that's not true across the board, but there would be a gap in the system, and maybe we have to make judges more accountable. I talked about the awful case of Caden Mancuso, the little girl who was killed by her father, and the judge did not listen, just as Sean is saying, to some of the mental health experts. So maybe we have to make the judges more accountable. What do you think about that?
Here's what I have to say about that, and I know people may disagree with me, or maybe they won't. And this is something that I think about all the time. There's disconnect among every single point in the system that we average citizens need. There's judges. No, let me start at the beginning. There's district attorneys right now who don't agree with cops.
Mhm.
There's cops who don't agree with mayors. There's judges who don't agree with district attorneys. There's judges that don't agree with social workers. There's parents that don't agree with the school. And when we need all of these things to align, they're not. So it's not just any one point in the system. The system that we need to connect, like an easy dot game where we're connecting the dots, nobody agrees with one another. Maybe in some cases, but there's just disconnect all over the system.
But where was it, Ryan? There was some place where I thought you had a good idea. And you said, well, maybe it should be more like a committee. And why can't we have, do you remember where it was? There was something you said on one of the podcasts. It'll come to me. And you said, oh, it should be more people from different disciplines. So why couldn't
Oh,
we have it?
it was
Remember?
it was the special forces veterans who don't agree with the vaccine mandates, maybe
Right,
having a conversation from a with a veteran who became a doctor, right? But having it
right,
be a conversation and not something imposed, if that makes sense.
right. So what along those lines, couldn't we have some kind of assessment unit with maybe somebody with a legal background, a social work background, when the stakes are so high, like in the case of that little girl who was murdered in Bucks County, and there was so much controversy about what to do, maybe we need to have some kind of assessment unit, just
You
like
need
there
to
should
have a
have been at the high school.
you need to have a person who is human, if that makes sense. You need to
Mhm.
have imagine this. Imagine you're in a court and there's one the defendant and the plaintiff, mom and dad are going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, right? And the judge is going back and forth about why he's going to make this decision, right? And the only person who's going to get hurt is the child, right? Maybe you have somebody, and this is in fantasy world, he or she comes in and says, "All right, okay, well, I get what you're saying, Judge. I understand what you're saying. Why don't you give me 2 months to work with everybody, right? And I'm going to work with mom, and I'm going to work with dad. All right, we're all going to step away from this today. We're going to take a deep breath. No judgment's going to be imposed. and I'll work with them for a little bit, and I'll see what happens when we come back, right? Because even at that level, I'm sure as you know, in family court, it's just so much. What's this parent going to do? What's this parent going to do? Well,
Right.
no parent's perfect, right? Monica is great at keeping the house going and this, that, and the other thing. But then Monica will also tell you that sometimes I swoop in and I'm the balance that goes, okay, okay, let's all just relax and take a deep breath, right? But no parent is ever going to be perfect at everything, right? And then sometimes in court, that parent has to prove why they're the parent the kid needs to live with when both parents might be great in different areas.
I say that all the time. We hold divorced parents to a standard that we don't hold intact family parents to, right? We judge them in a way that we don't judge intact parents to. But in the cases of, back to what I was saying, of extreme, you know, predictors of violence, where you see things, where that father was so violent on so many occasions, where this young boy perpetrator in last week's shooting was dreaming, writing, talking about ammunition, then gave a cover story that he wasn't really thinking about it. He was designing something for his video game. I thought that was a weak cover story. So when you have something with so many indicators, I don't think one person should make the decision then. There has to be some kind of crisis team that's mobilized. I think we have another comment from Shauna.
Shauna said parents can make zero effort, will keep cases open for years against the social workers' opinions. They give them hundreds of chances. Meanwhile, the kids are being passed from foster home to foster home for behavioral problems, or the foster parents is just over rearranging their schedule for the biological parents to have visits. I don't. You and Shauna can speak to that.
I mean, I'm pretty certain. I only worked a little bit. Shauna has worked more with the foster care system, but her point about too many chances is well taken. And again, the stakes are so high because it's children's lives. So all what we're saying tonight before we finish, because it's going to be a shorter episode, is that all these systems, whether it's the delivery of educational systems, the delivery of mental health systems, foster care, family court, as you mentioned, Ryan, they do need major revamping. It's not, you're not taking a screwdriver when you need a sledgehammer to change it. And it's not going to take a minor effort. It's going to take one of my favorite words, prioritizing. And you say I always talk about kids, but I don't feel kids are prioritized in our country. I
No,
don't
I
think
don't
they're the
say it like a
priority.
bad thing. I just want to see more parents. Let me make this comment also because, and I know that I'm gonna get some grief for this one. I I know. I don't think. I know parents need to prioritize their mental health. They need to prioritize their alone time, right?
Right.
But one thing we see a lot on social media is parents posting about like my house is a mess. That this is just what you're gonna get. This, that, and the other. Right? Okay, I get it. Right? Sometimes we just don't have time to clean up the house. Right? But I also think there's been this shift where parents will make excuses so that their mental health is the priority and they don't realize they're doing it. Does that make sense?
No, I'm not
You
trying
you
to.
you didn't sign up to be a parent to not take care. Like if your kid needs a little more attention, that's something that you just need to do as a parent. If your kid is acting out, maybe has some behavioral issues, maybe has trouble going to sleep, maybe you have a couple kids, maybe one of the parents works late all the time, so you're left always with the kids, putting them to sleep and cleaning up the house and things like that, and you're stressed and you kind of just let things fall by the wayside because you feel like you're doing so much work, right? I'm talking about the parent
Right,
who's home
right,
with the kids and doing everything. Now, that's a gap in your relationship
right.
that you need to address and go to your partner and be like, listen, I know this job is what you want to do. We have to find a way to balance this whole thing because a lot's falling on me, right? But you can't just say, I'm not going to handle X, Y, and Z with the kids because I'm not fully recovering
Right.
mentally, physically, emotionally on my end day in and day out. Does that make sense? Because
It
I
does.
think that's where
Right.
you really, really start to run into problems, right? And when I
I,
think about it, because I want to take some extreme ownership here, when I think about it, when I was younger with Alexis, and maybe you remember, Alexis, just stop, right? Relax, right? That was me when she was getting crazy. Now, as a more established individual who's done a lot of work on himself, I do. I would say if you ask me like a 99% of the time when the kids get there, this is what you'll see from me. All right, guys, let's calm down. Right? It's not me saying stop it in such an aggressive manner. It's all right, guys, we need to calm down, right? But that shit's hard sometimes, and I get it, right? But you can't let what's going on in your life as a parent be the reason that other things fall by the wayside
right.
in general, if that makes sense.
Well, you're saying you have to have an internal locus of control, and you can't let the external stressors deter you or get to the point that you're not doing your job as a parent.
You
But in
can't use that as an
defense,
excuse.
right. So, in defense of parenting, before we get to Marla's comment, I do think that the economic realities today are harsh. People in the accounting field explain to me what I said is really accurate, that you can't really have a level of comfort at a lower salary anymore like you could years ago.
Yeah,
You see what I'm saying?
I think
Safe
you
schools, safe neighborhood, health insurance. It's an enormous amount of money to do that now.
but I don't think it's any secret, at least over the last, how old am I, 30? At least over the last 30 years, it was no secret that college was going to be expensive. It was no
That's true.
secret that kids were going to be hard. History has shown that it was no secret that inflation was going to happen again,
No, that's
right?
true.
And to think that after this pandemic, we're all going to return to normal and there's never going to be anything that's going to happen to us ever again is just
It's
that's not
ridiculous.
realistic,
No, it's
right?
not.
Exactly.
It's not.
So you
No.
you can't live with this mindset that why isn't my life perfect? Everything
Right.
is just always that's where you gotta take extreme ownership and be like, listen, I made the decision to have unprotected sex and or expand and make my family grow or start a family. And now I really need to own up to that shit, which
Sure.
is hard.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's hard. It's hard. It's hard.
And taking ownership is a rarity, unfortunately. I think it's not as common as it should be.
Yeah.
Let's see. Before we finish, let's take one more
Yeah.
comment.
Marla said, I believe we should have a system in place to evaluate the situation before it goes to the judge. The judge only has limited time in court and they may or may not read pleadings before the case. It's not enough time in the background to make a real decision. The court system is so backed up to it, it doesn't work. If they have to go through mental health professionals and dig deeper, real change can be made. The judge can be informed decisions. We have to invest in a better system with more resources, not just half the income. Well, I think and I can speak to this more or less. Somebody who's lived through it. It doesn't go right to the judge in most cases. Both parents can agree to go to what did I go to
The
for
master.
the no after the master.
That it's the
Bef-
master and then the judge.
no,
Oh, children and you, child's CCS, the evaluation.
yes, the evaluation, and maybe you can just speak to that to give Marla some insight about
Well,
the
I want
process that helps the judge make the decision.
no, that's true. But before I talk about CCS, what she's saying is accurate. She's talking about the volume. What did I say happened in the mental health centers? It's the volume of cases. Shauna, I'm sure, can address the volume of cases. So Marla's saying, how do you move a mass number of cases through and still do your due diligence and not feel some time constraints? And a lot of times in the mental health, in the delivery of services, or even in the school counseling, ask Monica, the counselors will just say they're overloaded. They have a massive amount of students and they're
Well,
only one counselor. So that is offered as an excuse a lot of times, that the ratio of staff to cases is not good. It's not balanced. But I think what Ryan's saying, Marla, is there is some system in place with the court uh, evaluation program, but that's
but what's
not
the
binding on the
what's
judge,
the
by the
flip
way.
side to that coin? Also, it's expensive as hell.
It's expensive as heck.
Yeah.
And that's why I said it's not going to be a minor revamping. We have to prioritize, but the stakes are so high because it's a loss of life of young people. So it's definitely worth it. So I'm glad we had the opportunity to do some follow up. I don't know if everybody knows that the first victim's family filed a lawsuit. Is everybody aware of that today?
Mm, some
It
of
was
them.
the victim who survived. The family had two students at the school in Michigan, and one got shot in the neck while her sister watched her get shot. Is that a horrific story? Now, thank God they both survived, but they filed the first lawsuit for $100 million against the superintendent, the school district, the guidance counselors, and the teachers. And the end of the blurb in federal court under an equal protection argument that their rights under the equal protection clause of the Constitution were violated. They're not in that safe, free from a violent atmosphere. And at the bottom was a little alarming to Shauna and myself in the mental health fields. It said, probably there won't be criminal charges against them. Think about that, against the teachers, superintendent, school district. This case will be altering the system, certainly, because that's just the first lawsuit. There'll be a proliferation of lawsuits against the school district. So we want to stay tuned and see. I know you say I rely too much on the legal system to change things, but we got to start somewhere. And we have to sink some teeth and
Let
account,
me
as you say, ownership and responsibility. Like I said 100 times, it isn't that the kid got a black eye. It's not that they, were exposed to some violence. They lost their life, everything.
and to that I'd
They're,
like to say real quick, if schools and school districts change their ways because they're afraid of $100 million lawsuit and they're thinking about the money and not the bigger picture, but they change some processes because they're afraid of the lawsuit, fine. So be it. If you are acting because your fear is that you don't want to have $100 million lawsuit slapped on the school district, fine, right? As long as some sort of change
well, I
comes.
understand, but I'll leave you on this note.
Yeah.
If God forbid James got shot in the neck and Axe watched these Orion sons 10.
Where'd you go? Where'd you go? She asked a question. She's not finishing it. She froze. Up. She lost her internet. She lost her internet connection. All right, ladies and gentlemen. Well, I'm sure we'll wrap up her question and I'll give my response on the next episode. We do plan on being back next week. Thank you so much for tuning in. We did just want to get this episode in. I wasn't sure I was going to be able to because of work, but we got it done. I feel like we had a good conversation, a little bit of a follow up to what happened last week, and great input from Marla and Shauna as well. And we thank you for tuning in and giving your input, everybody. And thank you for continuing to make this podcast a success. We'll see everybody next time.